Fire emergency.
Please don't talk, just listen. I'm sorry I killed that girl. I stabbed her 40 times. Kimberly Compton was the first one. Oh, my safe. I don't know what's the matter with me. I'm sick. I'm going to kill myself, I think.
Where are you?
I'm just going to... If somebody dies with a red shirt on, it's me. I killed both of you. I'm sorry. I'll never make it to heaven.
Between 1980 and 1982, Minneapolis residents were terrified by a sadistic serial killer who would make emotional phone calls to police after his murders, admitting to his sinister crimes and promising he would stop the bloodshed. Despite the apparent guilt, the killer couldn't control himself and would strike again. Welcome to Twisted Minds. My name is James, and today we take a look at the case of Paul Michael Stephani, known better as the Weepy Voiced Killer.
Don't talk, just listen. I'm sorry what I did to Compton. I couldn't help it. Don't know why I had to stab her. I am so upset about it. I keep getting drunk every night. I can't believe it. It's like a big dream. I can't think of being locked up. If I get locked up, I'll kill myself. I'd rather kill myself than get locked up. I'll try not to kill anybody else.
Born in 1944, Paul Michael Stephani was the second born of 10 children, raised in a deeply religious household. Paul's mother remarried when he was just 3 years old, with his stepfather sadly becoming abusive to him and his siblings. For example, if the children got in his stepfather's way, he would smack them on the head and send them flying down the stairs. In the mid-1960s, he made his way to St. Paul, Minnesota, where he worked as a shipping clerk and a school janitor. He also worked at the Malberg Manufacturing Company before he was fired in 1977. This location is important, as his first victim was discovered near the machine shop in Malberg Manufacturing. This detail led many to believe that the anger caused by losing his job led to his crime spree, although the case is more complicated than that. For a short period, Paul was married to a girl named Beverly Lider, with the two going on to have a daughter before eventually getting divorced. While some people claim that Paul was violent toward Beverly, there's no real evidence to back up that claim. What we do know, however, is that it was during the 80s that his violent tendencies boiled to the surface. The first victim of Paul Michael Stephani was 20-year-old Karen Potak, a University of Stevens Point student. She was walking home from a nightclub at around 1 a.m. on New Year's Day, 1980. As she walked down the street near Pierce Butler Road, Minneapolis, she was struck from behind with a tire iron. While she wasn't killed instantly by the attack, she was left clinging onto life in freezing conditions. At around 3 a.m., police received an anonymous phone call from a man claiming to be the woman's attacker. His voice was high-pitched and emotional as he told the police about the gruesome crime he had committed earlier in the night. He even told them where to find the poor girl, the Malberg Manufacturing Machine Shop, where he lost his job 3 years previously. Unbelievably, Karen survived, but had lost all memory of the attack. Sadly, the next victim of the Weepy Voiced Killer wasn't as lucky, with an act that sickened the police and the public to their very core. On the 3rd of June 1981, 18-year-old Kimberly Compton was stabbed to death with an ice pick. If that wasn't bad enough, the victim was also strangled with a shoelace. Her body was discovered by a group of teenagers in a forested area in the north of Superior, Wisconsin. Following Kimberly's murder, police once again received an emotional phone call from Paul, admitting to his crime and panicking about being caught and arrested. This does give you an insight into the mentality of this killer, scared of the consequences rather than showing any remorse for taking the life of an innocent young lady. In the call, he said,
You find me, I just stabbed somebody with an ice pick. I can't stop myself. I keep killing somebody. Yes, please, this is an emergency. Please send a squad to Pierce Butler Road, Malberg Manufacturing Company, machine shop. Please, there's an ambulance too. There's a girl hurt there.
Can you tell me what happened to her?
Just hurry, she's laying on the ground in the back by the railroad tracks, by the edge here. Hurry.
What's the address?
I don't know.
Who are you?
2 days later, Paul called back and promised that he would not kill anyone else. Promise he would not keep. On the 5th of August 1982, 40-year-old Barbara Simons was stabbed to death by Paul's apparent favorite weapon, the ice pick. Her body was discovered by a person who delivers newspapers who was traveling along the Mississippi River. Little did he know that he had just discovered the next front page story before anyone else. Once again, the police received a phone call from Paul admitting to stabbing Barbara 40 times and killing Kimberly Compton. Police rushed to the scene to question witnesses, but the suspect had seemingly vanished. Barbara had last been seen at a local bar where people told police that she was given a lift home by a man described as being around 40 years old, 6 feet tall, and 185 pounds. The perfect description of Paul Michael Stephani. Knowing they had a serial killer on their hands, the police called in the big guns and reached out to the FBI to help profile the crazed killer. Kimberly Masnick put a theory forward that he was reverting back to a childish state when calling up the police. Like a guilty child who doesn't want to get into trouble, but getting a kick out of the cat and mouse game. While the FBI tried to understand the killer further, the police went to the Hexagon bar where Barbara was last seen leaving with the mysterious man. One waitress recalled how Barbara told her, "I hope this guy's okay because I just need a ride home." Sadly, this concern was merited. With the description of the suspect, the police dug through mugshots of offenders with a history of violent assault, narrowing them down to an 8-photo lineup based on the witnesses' descriptions of the man. The police then showed bar staff the mugshots, to which they all identified the same man, Paul Michael Stephani. Digging into his past, it was soon discovered that Paul had worked at the Malberg Manufacturing Company, where Karen Potok had been attacked on New Year's Day. They already had the admission to the first 2 murders via the recorded phone calls, but they now suspected him of Karen's attack. Looking back, they found the recorded phone call from a man telling the police about an injured woman in the street. The voice was identical to the other calls made by the Weepy Voiced Killer. Paul soon became the main suspect in the case, and the police set up a secret surveillance operation at Paul's apartment building. On August 21st, 1981, Paul was seen leaving his apartment. While investigators were able to follow him for some time, they eventually lost track of the killer. A couple hours later, the worst fears of the police came true when a man called claiming he had witnessed a woman being stabbed with a screwdriver. The man had attempted to stop him, but the suspect threatened him and then sped away from the scene in his car. The final victim was 19-year-old Denise Williams, a prostitute from Minneapolis. Denise had been working the streets looking for clients when she was approached by a man. After working out a price for his services, Denise hopped in his car, completely unaware that this man was Paul Michael Stephani, a monster capable of untold horrors. As soon as Paul turned into a dead-end road, Denise knew something was wrong. Before she could hop out of the car and run away, Paul took hold of a screwdriver and stabbed her 15 times. Denise tried her hardest to escape, but she couldn't get out of the passenger seat. In a moment of sheer desperation, Denise noticed a glass bottle sitting in the footwell of the car. She managed to pick it up and smashed it across Paul's face, giving her the opportunity to escape the car. Unbeknown to Denise at the time, she had just survived the grasp of a brutal serial killer. Following the murder attempt, Paul began to panic at the extent of his injuries and decided to call the authorities. In the call, he said, "I need an ambulance. I'm all caught up. I got beat up and I'm bleeding." Unfortunately for the killer, his voice was recognized instantly as the Weepy Voiced Killer, who was still at large. This marked the end of Paul's reign of terror, with police rushing to his apartment to arrest him. It does make you wonder if Denise would have been spared the horrific ordeal if the police had just moved in for the arrest, rather than deciding to surveillance the apartment first. During interviews, police found it difficult to find a motive for the attacks, although experts believe that it was his religious upbringing that influenced him to express remorse by anonymously reporting his crimes a few hours later. Personally, I disagree. I think it's pretty clear that Paul only cared about himself. When he called up after his last victim, it was because he got a little cut on his forehead, forgetting the fact that he just stabbed a poor woman 15 times with a screwdriver. During the first interview with police, following the last attack, Paul claimed that he was a victim of a robbery. When Detective Brown confronted Paul with the Weepy Voiced Killer case file, which included crime scene photographs, Paul stood up and said, "You're not gonna pin those on me." What police noticed in this fit of panic was that his voice went high-pitched, something identical to the man they heard on the phone call recordings. At this point, it was clear. They had captured the Weepy Voiced Killer. Paul was then charged with the assault of Denise Williams, but pleaded not guilty to the crime. The reason why they couldn't charge Paul with the murders of the Kimberly Compton and assault of Karen Potnack was a lack of evidence. While investigating his background, Detective Brown learned that Paul had previously had a girlfriend who ended up returning to her home country of Syria for an arranged marriage. Brown suspected that this upset, anger, and betrayal was the twisted reason behind the murders. Paul was initially imprisoned as a result of his assault on Denise Williams, who, in an effort to survive as she was getting stabbed multiple times by a screwdriver, managed to hit Paul on the head with a glass bottle and escape. During his trial in the Barbara Simons case, Paul's ex-wife, sister, and a woman who lived with him testified that they believed that the hysterical voice of the killer, revealing the brutal attacks, belonged to Paul. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough evidence connecting him to the other attack. Regardless, the killer was sentenced to 40 years in prison for the murder of Barbara and the attempted murder of Denise. In 1997, Paul was diagnosed with skin cancer and was given less than a year to live. Knowing that he would spend the rest of his days behind bars, Paul reached out to the police from inside his cell, claiming that he wanted to confess to all of his crimes. In return, he wanted just one thing: a photograph of his mother's headstone. After the images were exchanged, Paul admitted to all the assaults and murders that he was suspected of. He even admitted to killing another woman that he wasn't suspected of, but couldn't remember any identifying information about the woman, only that he had drowned her in a bathtub. In an attempt to find this mystery victim, the Ramsey County Medical Examiner's Office researched freshwater drownings around the same time. After days of searching, they eventually found a cold case they believed was a match for Paul's victim, Kathleen Greening, a 33-year-old school teacher who was found dead in her bathtub on July 21st, 1982. Although scarce, all the information Paul did share about the murder were details only the killer would have known. When investigators looked back at the evidence and examined Kathleen's address book, they found Paul S. scribbled down along with his phone number. This means that Kathleen was Paul's third victim, but it is unknown why he did not call in her murder as the Weepy Voiced Killer. Going by the phone number found, it is very likely that Kathleen was the only victim that wasn't a stranger to Paul. Does this mean that Paul only felt guilt toward the victims he had never met prior to his brutal attacks? In all of Paul Stephani's interviews, he gave no insight into his motivations behind the murders, although he did claim that a voice in his head told him, "Paul, it's time to kill." He also shared that after one of the murders, he went to a Catholic church and sobbed in the back of a pew. When speaking about this, he said that his mother had always told him to go to God when something hurts you. So once again, the Weepy Voiced Killer was thinking about how his actions were affecting him, not the poor victims he cruelly slayed. When talking about his murders, Paul said, "To this day, I can't believe it. I woke up in the morning thinking and hoping I'm dreaming all this. I don't know what to do except to say I wish I could turn back the clock." So did Paul Michael Stephani truly regret his crimes, or were his tearful phone calls to police just self-centered whines coming from an emotional monster? I suppose we will never truly know. According to Paul, however, he is genuinely apologetic, saying, "All I can say is I'm sick and I'm sorry, if sorry means anything after 15 years. Paul died from terminal cancer at the age of 53 on June 12, 1998, spending his last days on Earth at a maximum security prison. When compared to all the other killers we cover here on Twisted Minds, Paul Michael Stephani may not have a huge catalog of crimes or twists in the case, but his story is still remembered for the signature act of calling 911 in hysterics, guilty and worried about his actions. This detail is a bizarre one, with not many other killers ringing the police on themselves multiple times. It seems that he was in a strange battle with himself, wanting to take lives but not wanting to hold himself responsible for these acts. What makes him terrifying is the fact that he chose his victims at random and used unthinkable force to attack and kill those he selected. It makes you wonder how many other like-minded people are out in the world walking around with a time bomb of violence ready to blow in their heads. Gives me shivers to think about the innocent people that could be living their lives not knowing that they could be the victim of a random attack. Thanks for tuning in to Twisted Minds. That was the case of Paul Michael Stephani, and why don't you go ahead and click on one of the two videos on your screen for another one of our videos.